Hi, everyone. My name is Moritz Böttcher, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today and to facilitate this workshop on getting through to make a difference, developing advocacy and communication tools. I work for FENRO, which is the umbrella association of development and humanitarian NGOs in Germany, and together with the German NGO Forum on Environment and Development, we are coordinating the C7 process this year. We have 5 working groups which have developed policy recommendations over the last months. And as you probably all know, we already had our C7 summit and handed over the communique to the German presidency. Today, we would like to do 2 things. First, we want to have a look how advocacy strategies can look like in this context. And we will hear an input by John Rothroff, who has several years of experience doing advocacy work and monitoring the G7, especially as the former director for international advocacy at Interaction in the USA. And after that, we will hear some best practice examples on C7 and C20 work. And in the second half, we want to use these inputs. We will get into smaller groups and talk about what can be done in the remaining weeks until the G7 summit. So we will collect the ideas and results, and then we'll have a quick presentation afterwards. But I will talk about that a bit later. So I would suggest that we get started. And I will now hand over to John, and who will start with the first input. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Maurice. This is John Ruthroff. Welcome, everybody, from Washington, where I am. I've been working on the G8, was originally G8 summits since around 2005. And in fact, that was the year that the UK hosted the summit, Gleneagles, which was a major increase in NGO input, civil society input into the work. Oxfam UK was very involved. There were a whole lot of range issues going on. One of the things that we have to be aware of is that with the summit, the decisions are made very early. And so to influence the actual agenda, it's important to do it early in the year, or even beginning a little before the year that the new country takes over the head of the summit. So next year it's Japan, and then Italy, and then Canada. So each of those, if we can look at ahead of time and develop relationships there, is very helpful. Just a little background. The G6 was initially established by France in 1975. That included France, Italy, Japan, UK, US, and West Germany. Then Canada joined in 76. In 98, Russia joined, making it the G8. And then in 2014, it dropped back to the G7 because Russia was banned from having invaded Crimea. There are 2 possible targets now for civil society as we move forward. One is the implementation of the G7 decisions, and the second is evaluation. A lot of things get discussed and debated at the summit by the countries, but it's really key for us to monitor and work to influence the implementation of those decisions. We're probably not going to have time now, lead time, to influencing of the positions themselves, but it's important to track them and to see what countries are doing to implement them. The other is evaluations. The G7 does not do its own evaluation. It is done by outside institutions, which we can also work to influence, because obviously evaluations are key for developing future work on it and to influence it. The G7 each year relies on 4 or 5 different institutions in particular to do the implementation of it. They are the World Bank, of course, the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and various UN agencies. So if we're going to be influencing this and following it, we need to have access to having information and making input into the process within those various institutions. This implementation, often the summits agree to issues and then they never, particularly ones that the civil society is pressing, and then they don't get implemented. And many of the institutions don't do any evaluation. So it's very hard to know whether what has been agreed to at the summit is actually being implemented without NGOs doing some work to follow that and to press for information to be given out, to press for a more open process by which the process is discussed and by which the evaluations are made. Very good piece, Kel Kerr. I think everybody got Kel Kerr's piece on the G7. Kel is a long experienced person on this. He has probably worked on it longer than I have. And he has run his project for many years, and he's a real source of knowledge and for pulling organizations together to influence the summits as they go on. It is an evaluation of the summits is something that civil society can advocate for, that they be open to civil society, that the evaluations be done with civil society input and with our producing some of the materials and the evaluations that are used to evaluate the projects. Kel's history of the engagement of the G7 and C7 is very useful in that. But all of these things take contacts with the government staff. In the United States, we've had some positive and some very negative experiences. Back in 2005, for example, was one of the big issues was debt cancellation, and the international campaign to forgive countries' debt. And that was in 2005, 2006. One of the big issues at that time was the IMF Gold. The IMF, when it was set up, was accepted large amounts of gold, which could be sold and used for the forgiveness of loans to some of the developing countries, particularly in Africa. This NGOs did a lot of work on to influence. An example of that, of the usefulness of that, is that in the United States, we worked with the administration at that time. A man named Bobby Pittman, who was on the National Security Council staff, was very involved. And actually, we had a good working relationship with him as we pressed for this process to go forward. The other thing that's very helpful is to use outside evaluators. For example, in 2005, 2006, when we could have done the research on the IMF being able to sell gold and not be affected, we knew that there would be we'd have more impact and have more influence if we got a think tank, an independent one from the NGOs, to do the analysis. And the Center for Global Development, an NGO in Washington that had been around for 5 or 10 years before that, agreed I was in contact with the president of the center, and they were doing an evaluation of the sale of IMF gold to use for debt cancellation, debt relief, which was useful to have an independent think tank in this case, have that as a conclusion, not just the NGOs who are pressing for the changes. And that are going on. We can wait for questions if people have them or comments on this process. It has been running a long time, and each year NGOs get better at it. The NGOs in the host country need to lead on getting it started for it, and it needs to start before the actual summit itself, so that for next year, hopefully NGOs from Japan are involved on this call, and will be involved as they learn how the process happens, and so they can work to influence that Japanese government's positions and issues that they take on. But we need to start early on this. We often wait till it's too late. It's very different than lobbying a Congress or a parliament, where you do the advocacy right up to the vote. In these cases, you do it very early on to be able to have some influence over the agenda and over the decisions that the countries make. But I'll turn it back to Moritz and have any questions or discussion people have.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the point of starting early and building up contacts in the administration is really important to do advocacy work. Thanks for highlighting that. So if anybody wants to ask John something on what he just presented, please go ahead.
Hi, John. Thanks very much for the information you shared. You were talking about some of the negotiations of the G7 taking place behind closed doors and civil society trying to kind of prise open those doors. Do you have any good practice on when that has worked well in the past?
Well, ironically, part of it is building relationships. It's very hard to influence organizations or decisions if you don't have the contact and don't have build relationships or some sort of contact with the decision makers or with the staff of the decision makers. This is something we need to begin early. One of the things that I always pressed when we were going to advocate with the U.S. government is that we look for something that they're doing that we agree with, so that our material going to them and our papers and our letters and all don't just demand different changes, but also we look for areas where we actually agree with some of the recommendations that the country has, so that we can submit material that both says, well, we think this is a good idea, but we want these other things changed. I think that is more effective in the long run. And it also means starting early, because the decisions of these are made even before the meetings. So having that access and getting to talk to folks prior to their final decisions or the final communique is very important.
Yeah, thank you. There is another question.
John, thanks for your introduction. I have a question about sort of the other lobbyists, or this, I think we need to be fair here as well, the kind of the playing field, right? That civil society is not the only one who is trying to influence G7. So can you share any kind of insights what you know about, let's say, corporate lobbying, other kind of interest lobbying, and how that maybe works then, in terms of what we are trying to do? Thanks.
Very, very good point. Very good question. There are a lot of organizations, or particularly companies and businesses and other governments, who work to influence the summit's decisions and what they're going to advance and all. So part of it is developing contact with some of those organizations and being able to present NGO positions and advocate with them before they make their final decision on how to influence the summits. It's sort of a wide open field. Any organization with a government relations department or company or university or large NGO can make input, but I think it's really important for the civil society groups to try to develop contact with them so that we can have similar recommendations. It's not always possible, but it certainly helps when it is.
I have also a question. Like when you say we should start early and we should have our positions as ready as soon as possible. What do you think, from a time frame?
Right.
What do you think? What would be in an optimal scenario? In which month, in which stage of the year should civil society have their recommendations ready and start speaking to government representatives?
Good question. The country hosting the summit will begin figuring out what issues they want to have on it during the year prior to their taking over the lead, so that the issues that get developed, ministries and internal workings within the host country work on getting their issues onto the agenda. And so if we have made contacts with, for example, the United States, it might be the National Security Council, or other departments, Treasury, as usually has a major player in it. And so we're ready to beginning doing advocacy in January and February, right after the country takes over. They usually take over the summit at the beginning of the year, but it can happen very quickly after that. They may, if they've organized the year before and say November and December, they might start having meetings in late January or February. And so for us to be on top of that, we need to be ready with our positions and with our alliances to press the governments and the other organizations that are making input into it in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I think that it's a very good advice, because it's always difficult, especially in the context of G7, for civil society to be ready early, because, of course, a lot of times you just start working at the beginning of the year. So maybe we could, as an international whole of civil society, we could think about if it's possible to start processes earlier, or to continue processes throughout the year to be a bit more effective at the beginning of each presidency. But I think that is something that we'll have to discuss in the long term.
Sorry, I have a question for John. Thank you so much, John, for a good presentation. I'm very much interested in the work that you have done in tracking commitments and also working with partners with that organization that you referred to evaluate the projects based on the commitments by G7. Would you mind sharing information on how you used the findings of the evaluations that you have been involved in? Thank you.
Yes. Well, for example, with the issue on debt cancellation for the poorest countries, and on the issue of how that's going to be funded, we had built a relationship with the Center for Global Development, CTG, which is a relatively new organization. At that time, was a new organization, and the president said that it wouldn't be exactly what we wanted, but that they were happy to have us use the material, the positions. They won't be exactly what the NGOs want, but it gives us more credibility to bring in, it could be academics, it could be think tank, but some independent research done to be able to point out what is positive and what we want to have changed. It just gives us, I believe it gives us more credibility, and we're less predictable. I mean, I think the governments often know what we're going to be pushing for because we've done it for years. But I think having allies in universities or in research centers or other places helps give us more credibility when advocating with our governments. And in most cases, the advocacy on the government needs to be done by the citizens in that country. They don't tend to listen to NGOs that are based in some other place.
I see another hand, so please go ahead and ask a question.
Thank you, John, for the the great presentation so far on that whole process. You mentioned that we have the evaluating organizations that we could also potentially engage with, for example, IMF, World Bank, UN agencies, and so on. Maybe it would be interesting to know which, for example, particular departments in those organizations, and maybe if it's a UN agency, which particular agencies, just just for information.
Very good question. What's important is for each situation is going to be somewhat different. It's not going to be identical. What's important is to do what's called a power analysis of who's making the decisions and who is implementing them. So that takes some digging and some investigation. Ideally, we will have developed allies, or at least neutral people in the organizations we're working to influence. But each one is different, and developing relationships and then figuring out who the key decision makers. We need to be able to understand who within a government agency we need to contact and we need to build a relationship with. It's important to, when we do the advocacy work, it's important to have things be fairly short. The high-level people don't tend to read much, and so a long paper is often is put aside and not used, whereas a 2 or 3 page summary of our key points might be. So I think it's a combination of figuring out who are the decision makers and the key people in the institutions we want to influence, and then getting to them or getting to someone who knows them to try and influence what their positions are. And it's important that our research be clear and what I might say defensible. We need to do research that isn't skewed in a way that the data doesn't show, because the organizations we're working to influence will have their own research that we need to be able to critique also.
Yeah, thanks for all the questions and thanks for your response, John. There was another comment in the chat if civil society should be ready already at the start of the year. Did the C7 communique came entirely too late this year and in other years? What do you think, John? Is it always too late if you're not ready by the beginning of the year, or is it still valuable if you're still publishing positions and a communique and still doing advocacy work? What is your experience?
Right. One of the things that's important to develop is a calendar of when the meetings are held, so that the Sherpas, the top staff person for each country, have a series of meetings, as well as ministers and other ones. So looking at their schedule and knowing when they're going to be meeting will help determine when it's most useful to influence. If we wait until they've had 3 or 4 meetings and it's only a month before the summit, it's very difficult to change any decisions. We could then support ones we like, but we don't have the option for saying, well, you forgot this section or you should be taking position on that. So I think doing it soon after the first time they meet, but the finance ministers meet, the Sherpas meet, all of the different departments that have issues on the agenda will be having coordination meetings, both internally as well as internationally, because they need to work with the other members of the G7 so that they have their process is ongoing. So beginning in January, February is very useful. By March or April, it's somewhat useful, but as we get closer and closer to the decisions, the final meeting, there's less and less room for having input to make any changes in it.
Thank you. And one more question.
Thanks, Maurice. As Japan will be in the next presidency in 2023, we are also gearing up ourselves for the preparation of C7 next year. And as we discussed, as you said, that we need to prepare quite early, like in the beginning of next year. But the presidency begins in January officially, so it is quite difficult for Japanese civil society to get intelligence from the government of Japan, as they usually say that those information should be out when Japan takes presidency in January. So C7 Japan is not able to start before the January next year. But we still have 6 months to go, and the G7 Leaders Summit in Germany will be held in 1 month. And so my question is that what we should do for the remaining 5 or 6 months in 2022 as a next civil society hosting country, or shall we already start preparing or discussing which topics or which policy recommendation should be handed over to the next presidency, even though Germany is still in the presidency. So my question is how we can prepare for the next coming 6 months. Thanks.
Very good question. Timing is key, and I think in the beginning, it is like now. It's important to be developing the alliances, building trust within the NGO community, to be able to be ready to go early next year on this. I think it's very helpful to have a gathering early on, like in January or February, to help coordinate the NGO work around the world. So we're taking similar positions or we're supporting each other. But I mean, we know the basic outline of the meeting systems and when they're going to be done. I used to do a calendar on all the agenda things. I don't know, Ben, if is Interaction still able to do that? Calendar of when the meetings are going to be, but it's important. Usually there's 2 or 3 or even 4 meetings of finance ministers, of security people, of various folks. And the earlier we can get that schedule, we'll know when it is to make the input into it. So I think it's never too early to build relationships and to develop contact with the organizations that we want to work with. Over time, we can develop more trust and coordinate better if we start early. And also, it's useful to evaluate how we did in the year that's going, so we can learn from that.
Yeah, and I think we will definitely use the remaining year to, on one hand, of course, evaluate the results of the G7 summit, but also prepare for a handover to our Japanese colleagues. So I think we want to organize some meetings, and then we'll have to see, how we can hand over, maybe which structures can be kept up, what can be handed over, and be used in the future. So Great. I think that will be helpful. So I think we should get going, but there's like one last question in the chat where Francis asked, so basically we need to contact NGOs in the host country to ensure inclusion of issues of concern to us. At least how we set up the C7 process this year, we try to be as inclusive as possible and to integrate everyone who wants to join. So we had international working groups. I know that might have been different in the past, where like the national NGOs of the respective country mainly worked on the C7, but at least for this year, we try to be more inclusive for international NGOs, and I think it would be a good idea to keep that up in the future. But I don't know if you have anything to add to that, John?
I think working with organizations, working with the alliances, and working with key NGOs like with Bond in the UK, with the various alliances, it takes time to build relationships with them, and there's always staff turnover. So the earlier we start working with our allies in the other member countries, the farther we can get before the decisions are made.
Thank you. I think if there are no further questions, we can continue with some best practice examples. And we've invited some more input givers. And I would like to ask Sandra Martinson from Bond if she wants to start sharing some experiences, some best practice example from her work on C7.
Thank you. So yes, my name is Sandra Martinson, and I'm based in the UK at Bond. And obviously, we had experience last year as a C7 lead to support the UK G7 presidency. So I am going to share some quite therefore fresh insights on what we felt like were the kind of tactically the elements of more successful advocacy. Though, I think, as we all know, right, it's actually not a really easy policy space to influence, and not necessarily everything what we want is really picked up. But really, where we have seen some success, so I'd like to highlight five points. So first of all, it was really about understanding the playing field, who are the policymakers, where the decisions are made, and especially when it comes to asks which involve some financial commitments. So, for example, in the UK, it was very clear that if we want to lobby for something, we need to talk not only to the G7, obviously the UK Sherpa office, we also need to talk to Treasury, so which would be equivalent of Ministry of Finance, as an example, which has very big say in terms of what kind of money is available and for what, and obviously the FCDO, which is equivalent of Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Development, maybe in other countries. So it wasn't really the point here is that it's not maybe necessarily about the one particular maybe institution like even the G7 Sherpa, which obviously is doing a lot of diplomacy, negotiations, representing G7 country in G7 negotiations, but it's really also about other actors in the national context, which also may have a influence on what is actually even can be, for example, UK's position. So that was one thing, and then that means that we are engaging with all of them, all those key actors. So then also, which actually John already picked up as well, is about I call it the messenger. So who is the messenger? And also sometimes also I think we have to be, if we are really as a community, for example, of the UK NGOs, we have to be maybe less kind of attached to our own egos in a way, or organizational kind of ambitions, but really looking at who maybe has the kind of the best relationships, best chances to voice certain propositions which might be more picked up. And I think that is also a way to really ensure that eventually if whatever we are advocating for is really picked up, because that's essentially is the objective, right? So getting that right and really thinking about that. So then also I would say the message itself is very important, and here again the more success, as John also was highlighting, and looking at where there's some alignment in terms of the actual G7 or let's say presidency country or even a G7 member country as such, where there's common interest, and then obviously it's easier to work on those issues. But equally, it's also important to really also on the civil society's side to really pick on issues which which are supported by broader, civil society as well. So it's not just very kind of niche or very unique and maybe not mature enough ask, which may then therefore may not necessarily land. So that's the message, and obviously that meaning making sure also that those asks are aligned with the positions made elsewhere as well. So, for example, if we whatever we ask to the G7, so in another context, maybe people working on like also Jen mentioned about working on the World Bank, IMF stuff, or OECD or other spaces, that these messages are aligned, because there are points when they actually come together. And if they see, from one channel, civil society is asking for one thing, and then through the other channel is asking for something else, they kind of they get confused, and they might also go with the lowest kind of denominator. So it's very important that as a civil society we are really aligned on that messaging, and that again is then the greater chances that those things get picked up. And then the last 2 points is about timing, and again I echo that very much as well what was said before. I think getting these messages out early is as important as possible. And I remember we had also with Vendor this discussion, because we had like 2 papers, right? One was kind of more it took longer time and probably more well thought through and more comprehensive, and then there was actually one quick one which we did very, very early, so that when we started engaging with the government, we already had some messages. Obviously there's a bit of maybe not misalignment, but they are not exactly, but the key points we already had very early on. But I'm not saying that's of course that therefore we didn't get everything in the summit communique anyway. But it's definitely a fact that we need to start early, and I think this conversation what we are now already having about like Italy. So how soon you need to start? Probably I would say it's probably after the summit. Because that's the big milestone this year. And then I think going forward, probably that's where we already, like through Italy's presidency, we need to start prepare for the next year. And the last point is urgency. I think where we can really prove it's so urgent, and obviously nowadays, we all know in the situation, there are so many issues which need urgent and bold and, concrete responding action. But for example, last year, getting the language, getting that commitment on the famine compact, for example, we treat as a success. Obviously, this year we feel like, where's the progress? Where's actually action coming? So we do have a problem obviously here, but I think building that urgency on the issue is also what really can help to get an issue higher up on agenda. So that's my contribution. I hope it's helpful. And if, I don't know, people maybe have any questions, but keen to also hear others sharing your experiences. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sandra. I think a lot of points really resonated with what John said, and probably with questions a lot of people have on their minds. We have like 2 or 3 minutes for questions. If Becca asks that she didn't quite get the part on urgency, and if you could elaborate a bit more on that, Sandra.
Yeah, so the urgency in terms of how critical this issue is, and essentially, if this is not done now, if we don't make a decision now, X, Y, Z will happen, and that will be a disaster. Essentially, that's the kind of that urgency, creating the sense of urgency to amongst the G7, the policymakers we are dealing with. So that's essentially is the idea behind. I hope it's clearer now.
I would first of all thank you, Sandra, and ask Patricia Miranda from Latindad if she can continue with her best practices.
Thank you, Moritz, and greetings to everyone. It's been a while since I didn't see John and also Aoi, and glad to see that Ricardo is here as well. Well, I'm going to share my and our experience from Latin America and also from our participation in global arenas. And I would like to start first with the angles we see from from advocacy actions. And the first one is the direct advocacy, and that is what we have the chance to do here from this space, being part of the Civil 7 or the Civil 20, to have the opportunity to sit in the same table with leaders and global decision makers, and to tell them things straightforward with our analysis, proposals, and demands, and also being recognized as a valid intermediary or a valid a stakeholder to have a dialogue with as an engagement group. That is important, but that also is a responsibility. Not all CSOs have the opportunity to do this. So that is one important thing, and that is we need to be aware of the opportunity to be part of this process. It is also important to have a global idea of the process, because it's not only the G7, and to do it quick as an example, we can say that the G7 makes a decision on a certain issue with the IMF assessment or not. But later on, if it is a policy on the economic field, the IMF is very likely to implement this decision. And probably later on in the Finance for Development high-level meetings, this decision will be confirmed or revisited. So it is a process along the year. It's not just the G7, then it's the G20, the IMF meetings, the United Nations meetings. So it is a process and along the year, and we need to be conscious about this. There are civil society organizations, international CSOs mainly, that are working on these processes, are part of these processes, and they know the involvement of key issues along the year. So it's good to have these organizations also part of the Civil 7 or the C20 and to invite them to be on board. We usually know who they are. They are usually the same suspects as usually in certain topics, and it's good to have them on board. Then there is the other angle, and this has been already mentioned, and is to have a social movement in the host country, to have demonstrations. And this is something that we in Latin America usually do. It's not only to be in the meeting with the leaders, but also to be outside on the streets with key messages, in some cases with alternative summits. And this could be a variety of positions, but to be able to feed to those initiatives outside the official meetings that we are part of, to feed that with the key messages. Sometimes all these social movements might not be fully aware of the topics that are being discussed, and it could be mainly to be against the G7, but to feed with key issues, some key messages that could be also interesting, and to let know that to the leaders and the host government that people is aware, that people is looking at them, and to make some noise. Of course, this depends also on how open is a country to this kind of demonstrations, or to do an alternative conference. It depends on the country government openness as well. The other point related to this is to generate critical mass, to do sensitization, especially to the people and to the CSOs in general in the host country. Usually G7 or G20 issues are hard topics, especially if we talk about economic issues, which depending on the context, it can be the core of the meeting. And not all civil society organizations that would like to be involved in the process are aware of this. So it's important to involve them, not only by inviting them to be part of the process, but also to bring some prior capacity building or workshops to share John Ruthraff's handbooks, and to prepare the set so other CSOs in the country can be really involved in the process. Another point is the participation and inclusion of Southern countries, of Southern people, Southern CSOs, and I think this is what Germany, our German colleagues this year intended to do by inviting me and other colleagues from Southern CSOs to have more voices in the process, and it brings more legitimacy and value added. And I think this is a good example. And I think the intention in 2018, when Germany led the G20, is also another example, because it also said it is a precedent for following processes on the Civil 7. The other issue is about the media reach out, and it is always hard to get to them before the summit, but I think it's also worthy to try. But the chance to be in the media press room while the G7 summit takes place, it is an opportunity not only to have timely the statements or the declarations of the leaders, but also to be in the same space with other media representatives. And we discussed this sometimes when we said, why don't we prepare a press release and with key messages, with key issues, and according to how the meeting is evolving, we will reach other media, and because the other media that is present there will mainly inform and bring the news, but at that moment they might not be able to analyze what does this mean and what will be the impact of this declaration or this decision. So if we can have prepared an own press release to share with them and try to put some news like I don't know, the G7 or the financial architecture is not changing, and in this context is a weapon to it's a weapon against developing countries or southern countries, because for instance, and that is the topic I work on, if there are no changes in the international financial architecture, then famine and poverty and other social impacts will basically remain the same. So prepare something and this is something that we discussed before. I think we didn't get to do that, but it could be something to explore, to really have a chance by being in the media press room. Another issue is the meetings that we could have during the process. And this is to have intelligence, to get some intel from government representatives, and that also depends from the openness of the government, of the host government, to allow the C7 to strategize timely and select key topics. But, John and Sandra also already raised this, and from the participation I had in past Civil 20s mainly, I saw that the host government, when it's already the host and it's the leader, it's more hard to establish a communication. They are already with the burden to be the leaders, and they are more closed. But to reach them before, when we tried to reach some governments before they were the leaders, and reach them with our proposals, because in some topics we already know how they are going to evolve, what they are going to decide. Organizations that are working on specific topics at the global stage already know some key issues that we don't need to wait for the declaration, or we don't need to wait for the summit. There are things that we already know what are their status. So to reach them before with proposals, with analysis, we can do this. There are several CSOs that have a technical analysis, but also could do along with think tanks. To do that, this before they are the hosts, they even could be able to reply emails and to have a little bit more of exchange. So this is something that I saw in some processes, and when this government is already the host, it's more difficult to get to. They don't reply emails, and so this could be another issue to take into account in terms of how early do we start. And to finalize, as also John already mentioned, usually these are hard topics to deal with, and it's very hard to advocate on these global policies. So it's important to pressure on the leader timely, but also to reach other members that are part of the G7 that are not with the pressure of being the leaders this year. And in general, to put topics that we are able to push from the beginning. I know that before the Civil 7 starts, how can we start already to put some topics if we didn't have a meeting with all the participants that we invited to the Civil 7? And this is a process, an important process that still needs to take place. But there are some topics that we know that we as CSOs have to put on the table. And we can do that really from the beginning. And just then according to the context, put add some issues or some context. But we already know where some issues are going to this year. In terms of what achievements we have, I think it's very hard to advocate on the G7 or G20. But in some cases, I think that adding some language that CSOs put in their messages, that could be a part of some, if we can say, achievements. I think also there is more success on social issues or on cross-cutting issues. Sometimes they're more open to talk about gender, they're more open to talk about education for girls, or cross-cutting issues such as transparency, which it is important, but I think that we have also other targets as CSOs that are harder to put on the table and have a discussion or an open dialogue with them. It's hard to push on other commitments such as involving financing, commitments on financing from the G7, or transformative changes towards fair policies. But to raise those issues as CSOs, and I think the Civil 7 and the C20, if we compare with other engagement groups in these years, have been more specific and calling for really deep transformations, and I think that is what is expected from us. And finally, to keep raising to G7 leaders that they have a responsibility, and to reflect that with the decisions they are taking or that they are not taking, they have a responsibility with millions and millions of people. And I will end it here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for your perspective. I think that was really, really interesting. So I would like to ask Ricardo Moro, who was the C20 Sherpa last year, to share his experiences with us. Thank you, Ricardo.
So just some point, trying to recollect the experience we had last year, and we had with several of the people that are connected now. For instance, Patricia played a fantastic role last year, but also Aoi was involved in the C20 process, and many other friends. First, speaking about C20 and the difference between C20 and C7. C20 is a very big constituency. We were, I think, more than 600 organizations last year, and it is a space that is formally set up by the G20. I mean, it is totally is managed with a total autonomy by the civil society, but it is a space that is recognized, that is worded by the G20 process. We had some challenges in coordinated process, that is to be able to keep together a strong, let me say, biodiversity among all this organization. It was important to find the way to work together. That one of the first point was to keep together such a big constituency, and being able to identify who is really belonging to civil society and who is not, and just pretending to be part of the civil society. You would say, how can you do that? And if you have an organization or a foundation that is officially expression of a company, of a corporation from the private sector, for instance, we said that was not a civil society, a full civil society organization. Now, second point, how works the government side of the G20 process? And this is a sort of, if not parallel process, a process that is very similar to the G7 process. And what I would like to mention is that the first step of the G20, but also of the G7, is the definition of the priorities. The government, the hosting government, sets up its priorities, and the government does this the year before, not at the beginning of its responsibility as hosting country. This is a work that is done the year before. Then, at the beginning of the presidency, the government sends the so-called issue notes. They can use different names, but anyway, they are sectoral documents in which they try to develop the priorities and, let's say, the thematic agenda for the year. The government, the partner, respond saying, okay, we do like that, we suggest this modification, and then the working groups of the G20 start. They meet several times, and in order to reach the so-called ministerial meetings. And then the summit is at the end of the ministerial meeting. So for us, speaking about the work of the civil society, it was very important to be able first to receive the issue notes that normally are not shared, are not public, but we asked to have them in order to be able to contribute to the process. Then to be invited to the meeting of the working groups, and in a parallel way to speak with the chairs of those working groups of the G20. And we had also the opportunity to attend the ministerial meetings. Of course, being in the ministerial meetings is almost useless. It is a way to be seen, but it's not speaking 3 minutes that can give you the opportunity to change the process, of course. But being accepted almost also in a visible way in the official process, give you the opportunity or the relevance to speak bilaterally with the chairs, to meet the other representative of the other governments, to promote your agenda, your priorities, your idea. But one thing that I would like to say is that what I think that it's really strategically relevant, it's not to work some weeks before the summit or before the ministerial meetings. This is something that has to be done because you can anyway try to influence the way one specific line is written in the final document of the government. But what is really relevant is also to be able to work with the hosting government in the previous year, in the year before the presidency. That is when they write their priorities. This way, you are not stressed by the time, by the number of meetings during the weeks, the lack of available times of the decision maker that are not available anymore to meet you when you ask them political talk or something like that. But the previous year, they have time. They need even suggestions. Sometimes they can be more open or less open. But if they are at least a minimum open, they are even happy to receive suggestions. And that is a fundamental time to try to influence the process. And if I have to be a bit critical with ourselves, is that we build a lot of work during the year as, for instance, civil society from the hosting country, but we should be able to invest at the national level and as international networks on the next hosting countries. There is, in the case of the G20, for instance, working with India this year, because it's India that in this very time is writing the priorities that will be relevant in some months, that is in 2022. We organized our work in quite articulate work, and this is the model of the experience that we received from the previous year. Aoi is here, and he was a sous Sherpa in Japan during the G20 Japan or C20 Japan, and so we organized the work of civil society in working groups in order to be able to follow the work of the G20 working groups and to submit during this development our consideration and our documents. Then normally the G20 collects all the statements, all the contributions of the different C20 working groups in a collective document that is called Policy Pack. In the Policy Pack, we put together a first part that is a political introduction, and then a sort of annex with all the statements, the thematic statements of the thematic working groups. We are speaking about around 10 working groups, can be 8, can be 12 during the year, but this is the size. And then the G20 used to publish the policy pack in, let's say, mid-year. That can be June. We did it a bit later last year, while the summit normally is almost at the end of the year, that is October or sometimes in November. And then we issue the final communique just some days, some weeks before the summit. It is a way to say what we think. It is not really a way to influence the process. I'm referring to the final communique, because as many of us already said, at that time, well, decision already made, more or less. That's the reason why I am emphasizing so much on the work on priorities the year before. Just a couple of final, well, this is the description of how we worked and how G20, no, sorry, not G20, C20 normally works. A couple of considerations on the tools again. John said that it's important to write short documents because decision makers have no time to read longer documents. That is right. But I think, and I'm sure that John agrees, we think we have to do both. I mean, we need longer document to explain and to show how our considerations are scientifically founded, based, that they are not some romantic ask. They are strongly and well, how can I say, well-designed political proposals. And we need to build also our legitimation on well-written documents. But we must to be aware that these kind of documents are useful to sow cultural seeds, not to have the immediate influence. And the immediate influence has to be done with, and I totally agree with John, with short documents. So, for instance, the final communiqué and some contribution to the working groups. For instance, we attended the official meeting of the working groups of the G20, always with the written contribution, and those written contribution were, or at least we tried to have, documents, contribution written in a very short and with bullet points in order to identify the focus and the main messages. I totally agree with Patricia about the media center and the media initiative. But again, have been the awareness that this is useful for the midterm and the long-term action of sowing seeds, because it is probably not so easy to change a process, as someone was writing in the chat before about that, how the governments can't see how reasonable are our demands. Yes, but there are issues of powers that are immensely, hugely strong economic power that are influencing the process more than what we can do. So, with the social movements, with the culture, we can sow for the future. But then we have, and the media is helpful for that. I don't think that the media can be really helpful for the very, very short term. But we have to do that because it is a way to show and to make people familiar with our political demands. And I would like to conclude with the two things. The first is an optimistic message. If we were thinking about that last year, if we take care at the language used in the discussion about climate change. But Patricia was mentioning also other issues, transparency, gender and women, etc. But let's think about climate change. The governments are using a language that we used 20 years ago, if not 30 years ago. And that was a totally impossible to hear from them 20 years ago. And I think that this is the result of, of several factors, of course, but also of this action of sowing, of repeating, of making a cultural work. So don't be too sad if we don't see immediately a political result. Because I think that there is a useful impact day after day, and the other the second final consideration is on the need to assure as much as possible a coordination within the civil society in its different and diverse level. We need to invest in building bridges between the actors who are working within the C7 dimension, within the C20 dimension, within the UN dimension, official dialogue, etc., because this is fundamental to strengthen our strength. Otherwise, because the government can be sensitive if they realize that we are all together pushing for one specific political demand. And this work of coordinated is fundamental also to avoid some, let's say, competition among us. We are human. This happens. That can be good for the specific single organization that is able to organize a meeting or whatever with that or the other one or the other government. But this is at the end weakening what we can do all together. So I think that it's absolutely very important to insist in working together in that sense, and together means together. That means with a fundamental role played by civil society actors from the South. Because we all know, let's be very frank, that attending this international and global dimension from the South is difficult than from rich countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo, for your input. I think that it was very interesting as well. And I think, yeah, you're totally right. It is always a long-term game. All right. So please let me, first of all, thank all of the input givers for your experiences and remarks. I think that it was very interesting for everyone. And this is really helpful for reflecting on the process and thinking about the future. So, yeah, thank you all.